Michael Zwaagstra is a public high school teacher, a research fellow with the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies, and author of a new book called A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Welcome back to BCN, Michael.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Now, what can you tell me about your newest book?
Well, my new book is called A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. And it's a collection of some of my best articles over the years on the different aspects of education policy. Everything from the importance of content knowledge to the need to have higher academic standards to debunking some of the most common education fads that are out there. And so the book is organized into 10 chapters based on different themes, and the articles are sorted accordingly. There's an introduction to each section, providing some context, and it's really intended to give parents and teachers and anyone interested in public education a better understanding of what's going on, so that way they can ask for the changes that they want to see.
Michael, some people believe our public school system is in dire need of some tweaking. Here in Alberta, we've heard complaints from some parents and students that some teachers are using test questions and curriculum that are clearly aimed at vilifying the oil and gas industry. Now, this is some form of politicizing the classroom and indoctrinating students?
Well, this is a concern, and I've seen the test excerpts, and the test excerpt in question talked about identifying so-called valid arguments against the oil sands. That's a value judgment. That shouldn't be a test question. I'm concerned that any time that there's a particular position that a teacher takes and pushes on students. I think it's important for teachers to provide information, to provide different perspectives to students, and I'm all in favor of bringing in contrary information, both pro oil sands and contra opposed to oil sands, but make sure it's done in a balanced way so that students are still able to make up their own minds.
You know, I used to be the morning man at the radio station up in Fort McMoney, as they used to call it, Fort McMurray. And oil sands is how you refer to up there. People who are against it call it tar sands. You can always tell where somebody's coming from a lot of times when they say tar sands. Now, your book has a chapter entitled The Overhyped Promises of Technology. Now, is all of this new technology making us smarter or perhaps maybe not as bright?
Well, the reality is that there's a lot of emphasis that's put on computers and different types of technology in classrooms. But the research that's been done on this indicates that it has a limited impact on student achievement. There's no evidence that giving every student a laptop or an iPad, or particularly the younger grades, having them on the screen, there's no evidence that that actually makes any significant difference in terms of their learning. If anything, with younger students in particular, it harms their learning because they're losing the important practice and skill development that they need of basic things such as being able to write and to read. And it's just not the same when you're looking at a screen. So I do raise some concerns about the excessive focus on technology in the book.
You know, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up about writing. I work on a computer all day long, you know, helping to put their newscast together here, always on the keyboard. And then when I actually physically pull out a pen and piece of paper and I try to write a sentence, not print, but write a sentence, my cursive handwriting is terrible because, I mean, practice makes perfect. And if, you know, you don't use it, you lose it, I guess. Should we go old school and maybe teach our kids more about handwriting instead of being on the keyboards all the time?
Well, certainly for younger students, the early years, kindergarten to grade 4, I don't think they should be using computers at all, or at least very, very little. They should be focusing on printing, and yes, they should learn handwriting. Cursive writing is an important skill. As students get older, when you get to the middle years, I would allow some computer use, and I would allow significantly more at the high school level because, yes, at that level, I think they should be able to type their essays. But the fact is, when you're in grade 1, your hands don't even fit on the keyboard properly. And they get enough screen time at home on iPads and devices and all that sort of thing. I'm not one of those that thinks that they should be on a screen for large chunks of the day. So I would much rather have a lot less screen time, particularly with younger students.
How is your cursive handwriting? Still pretty good?
Mine has never been very good. I do use it, but I've never claimed that I have the best handwriting.
Okay. Now, you wrote an article entitled Brainwashed Students Are Not Critical Thinkers. Now, what did you mean by critical thinking, and how does this needs to be tied in with something called content knowledge?
Critical thinking is the ability to look at an argument or look at a position that someone has and be able to analyze it using information from different perspectives, and then coming to your own educated opinion about it. Critical thinking is often presented in school as this abstract notion that we need to teach the skill of critical thinking. But the reality is that critical thinking is linked to content knowledge. You need to know something about a topic in order to think critically about it. There's a common saying that I use is that ignorant people don't think critically, ever. There's never a time where you're in a conversation with a group of people talking about something, and then someone who has no idea what you're talking about comes in and gives their opinion. You're never going to say to them, wow, that was insightful, good use of your critical thinking skills. You're likely to say, you need to know something about this topic before you can give me any educated opinion about it. And so I make the case in the book that students need to learn facts. They need to have information in their heads. They need to have knowledge. It's not enough just to say that they're going to Google and find the information that way. They need to have information in their brains in order to be able to think critically about any topic that's in front of them.
You're right that much of our Canadian social studies curriculum lacks emphasis on specific historical facts and events. Instead, students focus on broad themes such as diversity and environmental stewardship. Is that a good thing?
No, I think that it's important to. Now, I should say, of course, environmental stewardship and diversity, those are good things. But focusing on those and reducing the emphasis on facts and knowledge and dates and events, that is not helpful. If we want to have true environmental stewardship and a real appreciation of diversity, we need to know about the rich history of our country. It's all well and good to talk in general terms about how much we like diversity. It's another thing entirely when we have some historical knowledge about past immigration patterns in Canada and knowing about Clifford Sifton, who was the immigration minister when Wilfrid Laurier was prime minister, and how they started settling the West. Knowing those facts, that gives you a real appreciation of diversity, not just simply having a theme where students are going to investigate it in ways that might perhaps interest them. You need to have the facts and the knowledge in your head in order to be able to do any of these deeper themes.
Apparently, some provinces are now weaving in a lot of the LGBTQ2+ issues, like you said, diversity, climate change, with each subject in the curriculum. But let me ask you something. Whatever happened to reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Well, those are the things that really matter, and I would say that having an accurate understanding of our history, accurate understanding of science, um, these are the things that make it possible to think about all these other subjects. You can't have a proper discussion about climate change if you don't know something about meteorology and how weather works. You can't have an educated discussion on LGBT issues if you don't know some of the history in Canada and some of the challenges around that. You need to have the facts in your brain. And my concern with the excessive focus on social justice is that we're short-circuiting the learning process. It's all well and good to want to do social justice and we want to change the world. We want to make students change agents and all that sort of thing, but they need to learn some things first. And it's a lot more authentic and real if you're choosing to get involved politically as a result of the knowledge that you've acquired, the skills that you've learned, and now you want to get involved. Great, I'm all for that.
Let me ask you something. What are your thoughts on Greta Thunberg?
I think she should spend more time in school, and I would encourage any 16-year-old stay in school and stay focused. That would be my immediate reaction. I'm not in favor of strikes, as they're being called, where students are skipping class. Frankly, whatever the issue is, I think it's important to be in class. And if there's an issue, whether it's climate or something else that's really important to students, do it on Saturday or do it on the weekend. Give up some of your own time, and that shows that you're really serious about something, as opposed to having a whole lot of students skipping classes.
Can you share what is happening with Discovery Math, a method of teaching that has become a little controversial and some say quite ineffective?
Well, Discovery Math is an approach to math instruction where students are encouraged to come up with their own ways of solving problems. And so instead of drilling for practice, instead of learning the standard algorithms for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, the Discovery approach has students essentially come up with many of their own problem-solving methods. And we see this in some of the math textbooks that are being used. That's why if you look at the Math Makes Sense textbook series, which is a misnomer of a title because it doesn't make sense, but it shows you virtually everything except the standard algorithms, all these different potential ways of solving math questions. but it's convoluted, it's confusing. Students find it very frustrating, and it's just not a good way to learn math. You need to learn the basics. You need to learn sequentially, step by step.
Well, the times tables, that was a big thing when I was a kid. What percentage of kids today are still taught their times tables?
Depends what province you're in. I mean, the fortunate thing is that as a result of a lot of pushback from parents in Alberta, the Alberta government a few years ago did put it in the curriculum again that students have to learn their times tables, although I think it should be at an earlier grade level than what it is now. Some provinces require it, some don't, but it's all about the emphasis that we choose to put on it. And something like that, I would put as early as possible, and I would have it emphasized that you have to have it completely memorized. Because if you're struggling with, if you don't know 5 times 6 is 30, good luck doing a complex algebraic equation where you have to do multiple steps.
So getting back to the basics, help build that basic is that we all need, right, in our lives. How do today's math students compare with students from 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, the answer to that question is if you look at some of the older math textbooks, you get the answer pretty quickly. The You see a lot more advanced math that was being done. You had those some of those basics masters, and so students were able to, for example, go on to higher level algebra at an earlier point. And again, a key thing is you look at some of the older math textbooks. Go back 20 or 30 years, and they show you how to do math questions. That's why a lot of teachers, and I've done this myself. I don't teach math now, but I used to. And I remember that if I wanted to get students to actually learn how to do math, I pulled out the old math textbook and I used that. I didn't use the new textbooks because they don't show you how to do it.
Now, here in Alberta, there's been talk of giving equal funding to private schools, and there's been some pushback from the public school system on that. What are your thoughts?
My philosophy has always been that money should follow the students, and most provinces do provide at least partial funding for families that choose to go to independent schools, and I'm in favor of that because it's a choice that the families should be able to have. The reality is that if the government were to stop providing funding to independent schools, it would actually end up costing the system more money because all those students would all have to immediately be absorbed into the public system, where the funding per student is at a higher level. And so the reality is that independent or private schools actually save governments a lot of money because they don't get the same level of operational funding that the public school students do.
Michael, let's talk about tests and exams for just a moment. Some say we need standardized provincial achievement tests. Others say that we don't. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm in favor of having standardized tests. I think at the provincial level, it should be a test that all students write at the same time, and then it's centrally marked. And the reason is then we can use that as a benchmark to find out how students are doing. Most provinces do have some standardized testing. I know Alberta does, for example. Provinces that have moved away from it, such as Manitoba, we've seen a decline in student achievement as measured by the recent PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment. That's an example of a standardized test. And so when you don't have standardized testing, it's much harder to know where things are at in the system. And so I'm in favor of having it. I'm not in favor of obviously of having standardized testing be the only thing we have. Of course, teacher created tests are extremely important and should be worth the bulk of the mark. But at the same time, I do support having some standardized testing.
Let me ask you something. Some teachers actually, I don't know if it's pressure from parents or maybe even the school board, but they refuse to fail students. Don't give them an F and they refuse to fail them. It's like we'll keep moving them along through the system. What are your thoughts on that? Like when I was a kid, I would fail and I would learn and I would study harder and then, maybe pass the next test.
Well, the default should be that a pass should be earned. And when a student certainly, and depends obviously on the particular circumstances of the student. I'm certainly not in favor of any blanket no fail policy. I'm also not in favor of a rigid system where you're slightly below and you're going to be held back a grade automatically. I think it should be done on a case by case basis, that it should be evaluated. And obviously, the older the student and the higher the grade level they're in, the higher their standards should be. So certainly at high school, grades 9 to 12, absolutely every credit should be a straightforward. You either pass or you fail in terms of you have to actually earn the credit. Obviously, when you go below that grade level, it's on a case by case basis. But Obviously, the default should be that if you move from one level to the next, you should have mastered the previous level.
Now, where do you see our education system maybe 10 or 20 years from now?
It's hard to say. I'm hoping that that some of the areas that we've seen some declines. I would like to see some improvement. I'm hoping that there's going to be some a push to having some more content in the curriculum and a recognition of the importance of these basics and of knowledge and moving it in that direction. There are some hopeful signs currently in Alberta with the new provincial government. There's some. They've certainly indicated the premier has, and so is the education minister, that they would like to see higher standards. And Alberta historically has been a very high performing province. And so I'm hoping this is an area where Alberta leads the way in moving away from some of the progressive education approach that we've seen recently.
Michael Zwaagstra, high school teacher and author of A Sage on the Stage, Common Sense Reflections on Teaching and Learning. Thanks for your time today.
You're welcome. Always happy to be with you.